Good morning. Chapter 14 today of Letters from the Lighthouse, and this chapter is called Keep It Under Your Hat. Now that propaganda slogan is still used today as an everyday idiom. Keep it under your hat means keep it to yourself. Don't tell anybody else about it. Okay. I rushed to the window, expecting to see a boat spilling strangers out onto the beach. Instead, down on the harbour side, a crowd of 50 or more people stared up at the lighthouse. Even without Cliff's binoculars, I could see that they were all Budmouth Point locals who, with folded arms and determined faces, were obviously here for a reason. The lighthouse, I thought grimly. They've come to get rid of it, somehow. Stepping back from the window, I tidied my hair and smoothed my skirt. Right, Cliff. Get your coat on, I said. We'd better go and speak to them. Cliff frowned. Shouldn't we tell Ephraim his visitors are here? I don't think they're people he's expecting, I replied. All the more reason to let him know. What, and be told to stay inside and touch nothing? I pointed out, feeling rather bold. As Cliff put down the binoculars, he looked at me oddly. You sounded just like Zuki then. Descending the ladder with an audience was even more nerve-wracking. Cliff had insisted on bringing Pixie along too, and perched on his shoulders, she looked like the steadiest of any of us. Once we'd reached the cobbles, I relaxed a little, and then I saw Mr. Spratt. What's he talking to them about? Cliff asked, as we made our way through the crowd. Dunno, though I was worried it wasn't going to be good news. When we got within earshot, I heard him say, Well, if we use paint as camouflage, we'll make the whole structure much less apparent to the enemy. It'll be easily done with all of you as volunteers. A day or two's paint job at most. Paint! I almost laughed on the spot. So the plan wasn't to remove the lighthouse, not literally, but to make it almost invisible with camouflage paint. It was simple, so obvious. How stupid of me to imagine they'd take the building down, our home, Ephraim's home. It was going nowhere. There wasn't any time to get used to the idea either. The painting was to start straight away. Mr. Spratt's motor vehicle was so loaded up its back bumper almost touched the cobbles, and when he opened the door we saw brushes and paint tins by the crateful inside. More men were arriving now, carrying 3 very long ladders between them. It was all happening fast, a bit too fast. I didn't think Ephraim would welcome this intrusion, even if it was a better outcome than I had feared. Mr. Spratt then called out, You over there. You're the Lighthouse evacuees, aren't you? I wasn't overly keen on the Coast Guard, I decided. Despite his important-looking uniform, or maybe because of it, he seemed to hold himself in high regard. That means he thinks a lot of himself. He also had horrid little hands, one of which was pointing at us now. I didn't answer him. He didn't wait for a reply either. Trot along and find Ephraim, there's a good girl. I looked at him dumbly. Me? Tell him we'll be with him directly to check his logbook entries. I was aware of Cliff sidling up to me. Why is he interested in Ephraim's logbook? He whispered. Because he's the Coast Guard, I guessed. And Ephraim's meant to write down everything that happens. Stuffing my hands into my coat pockets, I didn't move. Or trot. The truth was, I didn't want to be the one to break the news. Ephraim was on the edge enough already. Well, go on then, make yourself useful, girl, Mr. Spratt cried irritably. I didn't have much choice but to do as he asked. Stay here with Pixie, I muttered to Cliff. I won't be long. I headed straight for the control room on the top floor. Ephraim, I called up the last flight of stairs. Mr. Spratt's on his way. He says he wants to see your logbook. Ephraim didn't reply. It was unusually quiet, no beep of the radio, no rustling papers or creaking chair. We'd never set foot inside the control room, Cliff and me. We hadn't asked to, and Ephraim hadn't invited us. Like everything else at the Lighthouse, I assumed it was another thing we weren't meant to touch. Taking my hat off, I went a little way up the stairs. The harder I listened, the more convinced I was that Ephraim had fallen asleep at his desk. "Ephraim! Hello!" I called again. The silence stretched on. Worried that Mr. Spratt would find him, I climbed the remaining stairs, ready to shake Ephraim awake if I had to, and on the very last step, I stopped in surprise. The room was empty, which I realised with a sinking feeling meant Ephraim had gone out again without us knowing. There was no sign of anything mysterious. In fact, the room, with its wooden walls and special equipment, reminded me of our shed at home, where we still kept all of Dad's tools because no one had the heart to chuck them out. Except everything here was brass, kept gleamingly clean. I wasn't sure what all the dials and levers were used for, but they were awfully impressive. The sort of thing Cliff would have swooned over. Down below, a door slammed shut, making me jolt. The faint ping, ping of footsteps signalled Mr. Spratt's arrival. He was already on the first set of stairs. There was no way of avoiding him. I'd have to cover for Ephraim somehow. It was then that I saw the logbook. It lay tantalisingly open on Ephraim's desk, not 6 feet away. Perhaps he'd logged it in where he'd gone, since he was meant to record everything. All the while, the footsteps were getting louder. Mr. Spratt had almost reached the floor below. Seizing my chance, I sidestepped over to the desk. In the logbook, I saw lists and dates and words to do with the weather. There was only one entry on the right-hand page, dated the day that we came to live here. Journal of Light Station at Budmouth Point, Friday the 7th of February. Weather, fair. Visibility, good. Sea, calm. Wind, south-southeast, veering east, 10 knots. 0620 hours, radio contact Portsmouth. 10:37 hours, 6 German planes sighted. 14:16 hours, Olive and Cliff Bradshaw arrive. 16:05 hours, radio contact St Mary's. 16:57 hours, lighting up time. 19:42 hours, radio contact Plymouth. It was the radio entries that struck me. Only 3 times in a day. I was certain we'd heard him more often than that, during the evenings too, like yesterday with Queenie. Why hadn't he logged that? Mr. Spratt was on the final flight of stairs. I moved back from the table just in time, calling out, "He's not here, Mr..." before my mouth dropped. Oh. The head that came into view was dark and tousled. It was Ephraim. "Oh, golly," I gasped in surprise. "There you are." He stopped. "What are you doing up here?" "Nothing," I stuttered. "Well, looking for you, actually. Mr. Spratt's come in to check your logbook." His eyes darted nervously to the table. "Is he?" Ephraim came into the room properly now, taking off his oilskin and hanging it over the banister. He looked exhausted. "Where have you been?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "We didn't hear you go out." He didn't answer, but sank into his chair, brooding over a long white envelope he'd taken from his trouser pocket. "Ephraim?" "You'd better go," he said, not looking up, "before Mr. Spratt gets here." I stayed where I was. "Look, whatever it is you're doing, we could help," I ventured. He shook his head wearily. "You can't help, Olive. It's too complicated. What we're delivering is more dangerous, more important. than customers' groceries. I looked at him. So you are delivering something then? I can't tell you that, he said. Now, really, you need to. Queenie trusted us to help, I tried again. Because she knew Zuki, my sister, before she, well, what with them being pen pals and everything. Ephraim's eyebrows shot up. Pen pals? Where did you get that idea? I didn't understand. Zuki used to write to Queenie up in her room at home, really long letters almost every night. I stopped. A quizzical look had come across his face, making me wonder if I'd been onto something there as well. It was hard to imagine Zuki and Queenie as friends, given Queenie's frosty welcome. It made much more sense if they weren't. For a long moment, Ephraim stared at his feet. Eventually, he glanced up. Can I trust you? I nodded eagerly, probably a bit too eagerly. It wasn't. He looked past me to the top of the stairs, where Mr. Spratt now stood. Neither of us had heard him coming. Ephraim sprang to his feet, startled, and I stepped back clumsily. Oh, Mr. Spratt, sir, Ephraim coughed, offering a handshake. He tucked his other hand behind his back. In it still was the long white envelope. I was aware of Mr. Spratt moving closer to the table, of the silver buttons on his coat and the salty oil smell of him, but I couldn't take my eyes off Ephraim's envelope. It was moving, wagging like he was trying to get my attention with it. Morning, young man, Mr. Spratt began, striding over to the nearest window like he owned the place. You'll have noticed my team of painters outside, ready to start work on the camouflaging. The sooner we commence, he droned on, but I was too distracted to listen. What do you want me to do? I whispered to Ephraim. Take it to Queenie, he replied, stuffing the envelope into my hand. And so you know, she wasn't your sister's pen pal. I stared at him. What do you mean? I was. Zuki was writing to me. That's the end of chapter 14. So Queenie never was her sister's pen pal. It was Ephraim that she was writing to every evening. Okay, chapter 15 next time. Bye.